Antanil Tulian Meldanin, and thank you once again for joining me. My name is Lord Aramil, and today we will be talking about religion, and specifically some of the deities and pantheons in Dungeons and Dragons. So, shine up your holy symbol, sacrifice a beer, and let's talk about the other D in D&D. Now, religion is important in Dungeons and Dragons, far more so than it is in modern real life. Uh, Consider it more like the medieval times. Religion is a very powerful force in a lot of people's lives, even now, I should note, but especially back in the medieval era and in Dungeons and Dragons. And in fact, I would say that it's an even more powerful force in Dungeons and Dragons. Hello, Taylor. Good to see you. But it's even more important in Dungeons and Dragons because it's not just faith based. You can actively see the fruits of devotion, as it were. Now, what do I mean by this? I mean, well, clerics. Clerics exist. Clerics draw their magical powers from the deities they worship. And they use this to all sorts of things, curing the sick, buffing mighty uh, champions of good or evil or whatever, champions of their deities. Uh, they can bless harvests or cure diseases. All these very important things, which help to keep the people very religious. Even if your average lay priest or what have you, if the village priest can or cannot cast spells, is kind of not moot, but it doesn't matter much as long as you know that the higher ups in the church can cast magic because their god allows them to cast magic. But today we're going to talk about a few different pantheons that exist throughout D&D. Now, the first one we're going to talk about is the one that's probably most people are the most familiar with, because it's kind of the D&D basic. It is the Player's Handbook, D&D 3.5, Greyhawk campaign setting, Pantheon. And I call it boring. It works. That's what it does. It is probably the minimum effort, as it were. Okay? So, what do you have? Alright. You have a god of magic, Bakub. You have Ilana, goddess of woodlands. Erithnol, Slaughter, Farland, Rhodes. Heronius and Hextor, the lawful good and lawful evil twins. Cord, god of strength. You've got Nerul, god of death. Obadhai, god of nature. Oladamaro, Robes. Pelor, god of the sun. Saint Cuthbert, which is really kind of odd, considering that saints are generally not sub-deities, but they are sainted by another deity, if you get my drift. But yeah, Saint Cuthbert, god of retribution and judgment. Vecna, god of secrets. Weejas, more death, but this time with magic involved. And those are all the human deities. I'm going to say human deities because they're not strictly racially oriented. And then each of the other deities gets one god each. You've got Corellin Lorethian, god of elves. You've got Garl Glittergold for the gnomes. Grumpsh for orcs. Moradin for dwarves. And Yondala for halflings. So like I said, it serves its purpose. It gets people thinking about deities, and it's alright. If you go into the book, Deities and Demigods, you add in a couple more. Uh, Specifically, I believe we add in Bahamut, god of good dragons. And yes, so Bahamut is added for good dragons. You get Kurtulmak, god of kobolds. Lolth for drow. And oh yes, and Tiamat, of course, for evil dragons. We're still kind of lacking, if you would. That's like one culture's pantheon, maybe. And it really is, it's unfortunate that it's so limited. And of the few religions we're going to look at, this is probably what I'm going to call the baseline. It's kind of it's the starting point. It's where a DM can take this pantheon and then just tack on more gods as needed. And, sorry, I honestly think that a lot of gods are needed for that. Now, who do the common folk worship? Well, I guess you could worship Pelor, or Pelor, depending on how you like to pronounce it. And that's fine, that's fine. A god of good and the sun, yeah, sure, whatever. But what about farmland? Where's the deity of farming? Farming's kind of important for a lot of people. What about oceans? Fishing or just the ocean in general? That's kind of important for a lot of people too. You could make some argument for Farlan, which is how I'm going to pronounce the deity of travel. But he's kind of like, I always imagine him more as overland travel rather than aquatic travel. So there's that. So you need some sort of agricultural deity. You need some sort of ocean deity. Let's see, what else? A deity of crafting would be good. Kind of these, I don't want to say classical or basic deities, but there are a lot of things missing. Like, these are great deities for a player character to worship. And that's the important part, really. It's in the player's handbook, after all. But there's a lot more that needs to be fleshed out. And these wouldn't be minor deities either. As a matter of fact, a lot of them would probably be more well-known and well-worshipped than these standard deities. Just because there are a lot more farmers than there are fighters. There are a lot more sailors and fishermen than sorcerers and wizards and druids combined. Druidry is another thing entirely, too. And despite having two deities of the woodlands, we aren't going to go into druidic sects nearly as much. Nature worship is its own whole thing, and we will do our best to get to that maybe in another episode. I don't know if there's, well, I don't want to say that there's not as much out there, because there's plenty. But I probably would have to do something along the lines of comparing D&D druidic traditions to real-world druidic traditions, and that's interesting, don't get me wrong, but it requires a bit more research than what I have right here. Not to say that I haven't done some research for today's video, because I did, strangely enough. I know. A lot of the time it's just me blabbering on about this, that, and the other. But today, I wanted it to be special for all of you. Speaking of special, about 10 minutes or so before we started, Mew was perfectly, happily content, curled up on my lap. And then about 2 minutes before we started, she decided she had enough of that. So, for today's fur baby, there is Mew. Yes, she is so beautiful. Aren't you, baby? The promise continues. Now, we're going to talk about a couple interesting religions from one of my favorite settings, Eberron. Now, Eberron has a couple main faiths on the main continent of Corvair. And we're going to talk about the big three, aka the Sovereign Host and their dark alternative, the Dark Six. Because really, it's one religion, just the light and dark side of it. There's the Silver Flame and the Blood of Vol. And then I'll probably briefly talk about the religions of Sarlona, because those have kind of played a part in my own campaigns, and I think they're kind of interesting. So, now, the Sovereign Host. Let's see here if I can quickly flip over. It has a lot of deities, for both good and evil. So we have Araway, the deity of fertility, crops, abundance, plant life, and the natural world as viewed through the lens of civilization. Fun. We have Orion, the sovereign of law and lore. So, law, magic, cool. We have Balinor, the god of horn and hunt. Animals, hunting, that kind of stuff. Boldre, the sovereign of hall and hearth. So, community, government, marriage, that kind of stuff. Dol Ara, the sovereign of sun and sacrifice. Let's see. Honor, sacrifice, light, sun, diplomacy, these things. Dol Dorn is strength and steel. So, war, athleticism, competition, strength. Kol Karan, world and wealth. So, wealth, money, trade, commerce, theft, even. Ola Adra is the sovereign of feast and fortune. So, good luck, feasting, plenty, healing, good luckiness, pride, even, is one of their domains. And finally, Onatar, the sovereign of fire and forge. So, artifice, creation, fire, good, metal. Because it's Eberron Warforged. Yeah. And, now that is the Sovereign Host. And you can see that we have more deities that a common person might want to worship. This is good. That's important. If I'm still not mistaken, we are unfortunately still landlocked, but you could make a couple exceptions. You might be able to get away with ROI, but that's mainly an agricultural deity. Balinor, maybe for fishing, but again, that's still more landlocked. So there's that. Now, on the flip side of that, we have the Dark Six, which of course they are the evil. Okay, sorry. They are the evil side of the pantheon. So you have the Devourer, the sovereign of wave and whelm. So this is the deity of the destructive side of nature. Cool. The Fury, rage and ruin. So anger, insanity, passion. Keep the Keeper, sovereign of death and decay. Go no further. The Mockery, sovereign of betrayal and bloodshed. The Shadow, the dark side of magic. And finally, the Traveler, who is placed in here, the sovereign of chaos and change. Hello. But yes, the Traveler, sovereign of chaos and change. So this is the Traveler kind of gets lumped into the Dark Six because he just doesn't really belong anywhere else. Not evil, just neutral, and just kind of wandering through, as it were. And you'll note that, unlike the Sovereign Host, these are all... Oh, there's a specific word for it. Can't remember. But it's not like Balinor, which is a name. It's the Devourer, the Fury, the Keeper, the Mockery, the Shadow, the Traveler. It's very interesting dichotomy there. So, what can we learn from this? Well, among other things, the Sovereign Host, and by extension the Dark Six, they are, as far as I'm aware, a rather unique phenomenon in D&D, in that they are a syncretic religion. Now, syncretic is something you see a lot in real-world religion. It's where one culture associates their deities with another culture's deities, usually for the process of assimilation. The Romans were really good at that, so they'd basically move in, and it's like, oh, your god, Ares, is just like our god, Mars. They're the same god. We worship the same people. Don't worry about it. You don't have to rebel. It's all good. So on and so forth. Actually, the Romans were really good at just coming in and just stealing deities. Yeah. Let's see. In other news, Christianity, especially in its earlier phases, was pretty syncretic, pretty quick to gobble up any pagan traditions or any real like holidays, especially. Quite a few pagan deities became saints. Cool. Not really, but you know, it's something. Wicca, in the modern day, is very syncretic, very well. Wicca takes other religions into dark alleys, knocks them unconscious, and rifles through their pockets for spare deities. And I can do a whole another video on syncretic religions, so I'm going to kind of breeze through that. But the interesting part is that you generally don't see that in D&D. And that's because most of the time in D&D, if one culture tried to do that to another culture, the receiving culture's clerics would ask their deity, like, hey, are you actually Ares, or are you Mars like they say you are? The fuck? What kind of question is that? I'm Ares. I'm my own person, thank you very much. Oops. Don't record this. I mean, that'd be cool too. So, usually, the clerics would be able to just ask their deity if that's true or not. But, in Eberron, it's kind of a bit more nuanced. The deities are remote. So that means that, you know, they don't actually talk to their followers directly, which allows this to occur. So that's one kind of a unique part about Eberron, and there's a 45-second stream lag? That seems really weird. Hmm. That really should not be the case. I'm pretty sure it should be just it's set to low latency, so there should be like 5 to 10 seconds. But okay. Well, if you have a comment, please let me know, and I will and I will respond as soon as physically possible. I'll try to go like an extra minute or so longer then, just to make up for that. So I promised I wouldn't go through the druidic sects, but there are some really good druidic sects in this. Hello, Chris. Glad you could make it. All right. So, other things that we want to talk about. After the Dark Six, we have the Church of the Silver Flame, which is kind of cool in its own way, in Eberron especially, because it is monotheistic. Yes. This would be a church that follows a single deity. And you don't see that a lot in Dungeons and Dragons, because generally speaking, monotheistic traditions are rather exclusive. They can't gently abide with other religions, mainly because, you're saying, like, my deity is the only deity. And when there are other deities active, they talk to their followers and do that. It's kind of hard to have a monotheism. But for reasons I've mentioned, the Silver Flame makes it work to an extent. The Silver Flame is really kind of I don't want to call it a copy of Catholicism, because it's not quite. It definitely has a few interesting. Oh, it's basically fantasy Catholicism. I'm not even gonna lie. It has a almost city state in and of itself, where the Silver Flame burns. There is the Keeper of the Silver Flame, which is kind of the head of the whole church, who lives in that city state. And it is known for just a whole bunch of like crusades. And of course, the problem is that it has a very troubled past, especially during the last war, which the standard Eberron campaign setting. The last war was 100 years or so, and it ended like I think 2 to 4 years before the standard campaign begins. So the country of Thrain is a theocracy under the Silver Flame, and there were a lot of we'll call it a checkered past during the war. Quite a few very bad massacres were committed in the name of the Silver Flame. Usually, massive like burnings and witch fires, purifying the land. is a very rough time. So, yeah, we're going to gently flip past that because that could be another video in and of itself. So, let's see. I went through Sovereign Host, Arc 6, Silver Flame. I don't really want to talk about the Blood of Vol because it's kind of creepy. It's basically, at its core, it's a cult sponsored by an ancient lich. But almost nobody knows about that. So, what it is to the common person, it is the belief in the divinity of your own soul, as expressed or as it's a good term. Okay, as expressed through your own blood. Basically, your blood is divine, and you are divine because of it. Death is bad, and therefore, the way you escape undeath is through being undead. That's kind of like the Blood of Vol's shtick. Eh? Yeah. Other things of interest, though, we do have, let's say, 3 more really interesting things from Eberron. The Inspired of Riedra on the continent of Sarlona. Kind of. Now, this is another cult that is actually just made up. It's made up in universe, I should say. So to control their country of Riedra, the Inspired made a religion known as the Path of Inspiration, which is kind of Hindu-esque in a way. It's reincarnation based. So if you do well in this life, you'll be reborn as a higher tier in the next life, and it's interesting. So you might have an ogre might believe that if they do a good job, they'll be reincarnated as a shifter. If a shifter does a really good job, then they'll be reincarnated as a human. If a human does a really good job, they'll be reincarnated as a changeling. And if a changeling does really good, they might be reincarnated as an inspired. That's kind of their thing. Of course, it's all fake, I guess. The Inspired just made it up so that people would not question it. People would just take them at their word and, work really hard so that they too could, progress. Which is interesting in a couple different ways. One, it's an interesting thing. You don't usually see cycles of reincarnation in a lot of these. And also just the fact that it's fake. Just that it is in-universe fake. People just made up the religion for the reasons that people actually do make up religions. It's just a means to control and gain power. Which I find to be quite fascinating. It's kind of meta in its own way, but, cool. Let's see. We have the Path of Light, which is practiced by the Kalashtar. And the Kalashtar, basically, it's a cyclical view of the universe. But specifically the plane of dreams, where the Kalashtar come from. They believe that the current plane of dreams is kind of a nightmare, and that's where the Inspired come from. They're kind of like the nightmare people. Sorry. And the Kalashtar believe that by following the Path of Light, they can slowly turn the wheel so that the plane of dreams becomes a good dream instead, which would completely destroy the inspired, which is a nice bonus, and usher in a new age of prosperity. Cool. Finally, I'm going to talk about the Undying Court of Aramil, because they're elves, and of course, I fucking love elves. And these are some really cool elves, because they're not undead, they're unliving. So, in Aramil elven culture, if you are a paragon of your craft or your whatever, whether that's as a warrior, a craftsman, politician, whatever, after your death, you will basically undergo a ritual. I'm trying to figure out how best to phrase where you are imbued with positive energy, and that's the important part. Is the unliving are fueled by positive energy, whereas undead are fueled by negative energy. So positive energy infuses your body, keeps your soul in your body, and you join the Undying Court, which are like thousands of the greatest counselors, crafters, soldiers, whatever, of Aramil's history. And these are thousands of people. They don't outright rule Aramil, but they kind of act as these guides. So it's if you think of like the celestial bureaucracy of Chinese mythology, it's similar to that in a way. And what's interesting is that these are people who collectively have the power of a pantheon, and they're living descendants. It's kind of an ancestor worship too, just kind of thrown in there. And their living descendants can go and talk to them. They can be consulted. They give advice. They don't outright rule, because that would prevent other people from attaining their paragon status. If you catch my drift. Okay. Just making sure that my... Ooh, I should probably pop out the live chat. I forgot to do that. There we go. Okay, I think we are still up to date. Yeah, I really I like that. It's pretty cool. I don't think I've seen anything like that before in other campaigns, so it's neat. Yeah. Boom, 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 boom. There's my analytics. Cool. Okay. Now, with about 25 minutes remaining, we're going to talk about one final group, or one final campaign setting. Forgotten Realms. Now, Forgotten Realms is perhaps the most complete group of pantheons in all of D&D. Now, I could be wrong. There could be more that are more complete, but it would be difficult, I feel. So I'm just going to very quickly go through just the list of deities. I'm not even going to talk much about them. I'm just going to list them off, alright? Here's Azuth, Bane, Shantea, Cyric, Illustre, Gond, Helm, Ilmater, Kelemvor, Kossuth, Lathander, Loth, Malar, Mask, Meliki, Mistra, Ogma, Saloon, Shar, Shondakil, Sylvanas, Soon, Talos, Tempest, Torn, Timora, Tyr, Umberly, Uthgar, Joaquin. Those are the major deities. Minor deities include Akkadi, Auril, Ashaba, Denir, Eldath, Finder Wyvern Spur, Garagos, Gargoth, Grumbar, Gueron Windstrom, Hor. That's unfortunate. Istitia, excuse me. Jurgle, Lerira, Leviatar, Luru, Milil, Nobanion, Red Knight, Savras, Sharas, Shialia, Siamorphe, Talona, Tiamat, once again, Ubtau, Ulutiu, Valkur, Vilshroom. And then we get to the racial pantheons. The Drow pantheon, in addition to Lolth, of course, includes Gonadar, Kiran Sali, Selvatarm, and Varun. The Dwarven pantheon includes Abathor, Baranor Truesilver, Clangadin Silverbeard, Deep Dwera, Dugmarin Brightmantle, Dumathoin, Gorm Gulthin, Hela Brightaxe, Ladigar, Marthamor Dwayne, Moradin, of course, Sharindlar, Thard Har, and Vergadane. My favorite, of course, would be Clangadin Silverbeard, as I played a cleric of Clangadin for years as Vite. The Elven Pantheon includes Airdrie Fania, Angharad, Corellin Lorethian, Deep Sashalis, Erevan Ilseri, Finmarl Mistarin. I swear, they just make these hard to pronounce on purpose. Hanali Kelanil, Labalus Enorith, Rilifane Ralathil, Sahanin Moonbow, Shivaresh, and Solinar Thelandira. I should have gone through these beforehand just to make sure I could pronounce them. God dang. The Gnomish Pantheon. Bearvan Wild Wanderer, Baravar Cloak Shadow, Caladuran Smooth Hands, Londal Steelskin, Gerdal Iron Hand, Garl Glittergold, once again, Sigojan Earthcaller, and Erdlin. The Halfling Pantheon includes Avorine, Brandobarus, Cirilanli, Sheila Periroyal, Uragolan, and Yondala. So you can see that, just like I mentioned earlier, they basically took the base pantheon, changed some things around it, and added a ton more deities. We also have the Mulhorandi pantheon of Anther, Geb, Hathor, Horus Ray, Isis, Nephthys, Cyrus, Sebek, Sot, and Toth. It's basically the Egyptian pantheon made D&D. And finally, the Orc pantheon of Bogtru, Grumsh, Ilnaval, Luthic, Shargas, and Urtrus. So, basically a deity for everyone, and multiple deities with overlapping spheres, like you get in real life across a huge-ass continent and a half. So I'm actually going to end us off pretty early today. I'm going to try and give us an extra bit of time to say something. But this was just kind of like an introduction, and I'm actually thinking next week I might do a full video just on the Forgotten Realms pantheons, just because there's so much to talk about. So, I hope that you've enjoyed. I know that I have, of course, and I know that Mew has. Look at that baby. So good. Alright. So, until next time, please leave a like, give me a comment, say what you liked. If you've played a cleric or any deity, really, or any D&D character, what is your favorite patron deity? Let me know down below. And until we meet again, dear friends, farewell.